the one piece of advice I would offer is patience. That there is plenty of time, that your mark, your ATAR doesn't define you. People will forget about it pretty quickly. You'll probably forget about it pretty quickly. There are so many opportunities. So take the opportunities, appreciate the opportunities that affords you. Be patient and back yourself. Experiment.
In 1837, Horace Mann created the education system, a system at the time designed to pump out factory workers and professors. The same system that is still being used today in the 21st century. Now, Mann's system is backfiring. We are being moulded by the same industrial system that has existed for close to 200 years. That system delivers us into a digital economy that has no need of our outdated skills. This isn't our teachers' fault. This isn't the government's fault. This is due to a rapidly changing world full of technology and unforeseen circumstances. And us Gen Zs are caught in the middle. Welcome to the Driven Young podcast, the podcast for stressed, overwhelmed young Australians, teaching you practical life skills you can implement now to set yourself up in life. And now your host, Byron Dempsey.
Welcome back to the Driven Young podcast. Today, Duncan Young joins me on the show. Duncan has been working with organisations for the past 17 years as an organisational development consultant, facilitator and executive coach. He's implemented training programs throughout Asia Pacific and Europe across a broad range of industries and clients from both the private and the public sector. Now, that's a mouthful, but basically, he started out studying arts, then he went into acting, then he went through the corporate world, and now he's running his own business. And I really want you to pay attention to all the different career pathways Duncan tried before he got to where he is now. As you will hear, it is totally okay to switch careers or degrees. It's just human nature to want to switch. In this episode, we discuss leadership for young people. We discuss how a degree doesn't equal a job nowadays, and how to improve your chances of landing a job, understanding different personality types, extroverts and introverts, and much, much more. If you get some value out of this episode, it would mean the world to me if you left a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And my favorite parts, as per usual, will be up on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, so keep an eye out there. Otherwise, over to Duncan. Duncan, welcome so much to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Byron.
Super excited to have you on, and I think we've got some really cool topics we're going to be talking about today. But before we dive into kind of leadership, communication, a bunch of stuff that you do running workshops around, I'd love to know just a little bit about your story, what you did after high school, and what you're currently up to.
Yeah, so I've got a sort of quite a varied educational pathway. So I came out of high school, I'm going to show my age here, it's late 80s, and spent a year travelling. So, I worked, saved up as much money as I could, travelled through Europe in that first year out of high school, came back, did an arts degree at Sydney Uni, which it's funny, I was talking about that last night with my kids, just with regards to what that meant and what it was about, and what I had intended to do with that and what I ended up doing with that. Of course, it all changes a lot through that period.
Yeah.
From there, I got so I was at Sydney Uni. I got involved with the Sydney Uni Drama Society. Did a couple of plays. I travelled again in that year after my arts degree. Went to the Edinburgh Festival and did a play as part of the Fringe Festival over there. Came back, thought I'd never really been an actor and never really had that aspirations for it, but it kind of got its hooks in me in that year. So I came back. I thought, well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I thought I'll audition for drama school. So I got into, much to my surprise, I got into NIDA.
Oh, really?
Yeah, spent 3 years there, then worked for the best part of 15 years as a professional actor. And kind of in parallel with that, I'd always taught on some level. So I tutored throughout uni. When I was at NIDA, there's a thing called the Open program, which was kind of a weekend school where kids would come along and do drama classes. So I always taught as part of that. So it was kind of in my blood. I think my mum was a teacher, and I got sort of drawn into adult education and the world of corporate training. So I kind of got into that world, worked for a business that ran workshops on alternate conflict resolution. I got a whole bunch of kind of accreditations and did a lot of training throughout the years. Started my own business about 9 years ago, and here we are.
Damn, okay. So you've done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I like the point you kind of spoke about was I got an arts degree.
Yeah.
And I guess you kind of said are you using that arts degree? Like, what was that degree like for you? What was your goal with kind of getting that? And I guess it sounds like you didn't have a very clear vision. You just kind of went with it. You ended up
initially I did. Now and I think it's really interesting when I kind of look at younger people coming into the workforce. And as I was saying just before we kicked off, we've done a lot of work through the business. We've done a lot of work with graduates coming into the professional world and just kind of helping them orient themselves with regards to, what the expectations are, how it's different from being perhaps, whether you've been through the university system or whatever your pathway into that's been.
Yeah.
It can be a bit of a shock to people just to kind of get a sense of what are the norms of operating in that environment
compared to what they've been used to, which is and it's a huge wake up, because we've gone from kindergarten to primary school to high school to university, where it's all structured education, and suddenly enter the corporate world or the workforce, and it's like there's no accountability. You've got to do the work.
Yeah, that's right.
No one's going to be like, hey, did you get your assignment done? It's like, if you don't get it done, you're fired, or you're in trouble. Like, you've got to be self accountable. You've got to be a lot more driven and put in a lot more hours, and especially in the corporate world. Yeah. And so that can be a bit of a wake up call.
Yeah, and depending on what business you're talking about, and obviously there's huge variability with this, but I think a lot of the businesses. So we do a lot of work with the the professional services firms, the law firms, the banks, and by and large they've become a lot better, I think, at putting in place structures and support mechanisms for people entering the workforce. So they have gotten a lot better. It's not so much sink or swim. There's, I was running an induction program. I used to run an induction program for one of the big four banks for many, many years. And their view was that for the first 2 years of a graduate's life in the bank, it was kind of the bank was investing in them to get them up to speed. They weren't really expecting the graduate to provide a whole lot of value in terms of what they were contributing back. But so it's kind of like an apprenticeship scheme where they're bringing them along, showing them the ropes, letting them get a sense of what that world's all about and what's expected, in order that now the challenge for them, of course, is that they hope that those graduates stick around.
Yes,
because
but they're to be able to do that without responsibility and of having and taking full responsibility of their role, because they're still an apprentice sort of.
Yeah. And so the kind of the goal, the golden rule is there's never any stupid questions. Just keep asking, keep inquiring, keep learning. And and there will be the support provided around that. And that's not to say that it's always ideal, because I think there is always going to be some sort of cutthroat elements and moments within that environment, because they're commercially driven organisations. And if we look at what's happening now, and at least a couple of the big four accounting firms, are slashing and burning jobs at the moment. And that's just as a consequence of the current situation.
Of course,
and they're always going to do that, because they're fundamentally they've got to look after the bottom line. And so, it's an interesting dynamic where there is this necessity to really look after people, and that's I suppose the growing sense of humanity within corporate world, and I hope that's something that continues and grows. But on the flip side of that, these are strongly organisations that are strongly driven by a commercial imperative. So there's always going to be that sort of balancing.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so you mentioned you work with a lot of people kind of entering the workforce, and so for someone listening who's in high school or coming out of uni, like, what are the struggles you're seeing with young people who are? Because, we mentioned just before we started, degree doesn't equal job anymore.
Yeah.
Degree used to equal job. I get a degree, I just say I've got this degree, I can get a job. 20, 30 years ago, that was kind of how it worked. But now uni's way more accessible. There's way more people going into uni, which means there's way more competition, and degree doesn't exactly equal job. It'll help, but it's not going to guarantee you a position. So what are the struggles you're seeing with young people trying to enter the workforce currently?
Yeah, so look, to be honest, I'm probably not highly qualified to talk about the struggles of getting in. What we see more often is once they're in, what are some of those challenges, and what's the difference between somebody who thrives in that environment and somebody who might struggle a little bit more. So I know a little bit about the challenges and the difference with regards to how it is now compared to how it was when I came out of uni. To some degree, I think even having back in my day, having done an arts degree,
It didn't guarantee you anything.
I mean, because I went in with an intention of because I did okay in the HSC, somewhere in the middle, and I thought, well, I'll get in, I'll do well enough that I can then transfer, and I thought I'd transfer into a law degree. And I needed a grade credit average to do that, and I achieved that. But I went into an arts degree. I was saying this last night. I think it was history, economics, and English.
Right.
And two of those three subjects, I just wasn't enjoying them at all. I'd done 3-unit economics at high school, but got into university, and I was just like, you know what, this is not for me. I ended up doing Spanish, English, and fine arts.
You just cut them and swapped.
Yeah, I just cut them and swapped over to something I thought I'd enjoy. Yeah.
I think it's important people do that, because a lot of people will be doing something they feel like they've already committed 6 months or a year to that section of the degree, and so they're kind of scared to cut it. But if you're not enjoying it, you just got to cut it and swap to something that is more enjoyable. Otherwise, you're going to be 5 years down the line. Yeah.
I was talking to we had friends over last night actually, and one of our great friend's daughter who finished the HSC last year and is doing nursing at the moment.
Yeah.
And she was, it's interesting. She was offering a slightly, because in my day to transfer from subject to subject was quite easy. But I think there is, and I don't necessarily understand the detail of this, but the way universities charge for courses now makes it. I think that sort of sunk cost issue is more prevalent now.
Yes.
It would seem to me. So you've committed to something, you paid for it. So you kind of got to see it through. Whereas I think maybe we had more flexibility to move about.
And the average price of university's gone up quite a bit as well.
Totally, yeah. And it's, God, I'd hate to come out of a degree with the sort of debt that you have now compared to what I had. We were able to work it off pretty easily.
Yeah.
But,
and we're only still like 40 or 50,000 compared to America. Which is
crazy.
Like hundreds of thousands. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Almost unimaginable.
I know. Yeah, my brother's living over there, and his kids are just coming out of high school over there, and it's. Yeah, I think unless you get some sort of scholarship, it's a horrendous proposition.
Yeah, because that's why they got the college fund.
Yeah,
like college funds don't exist here because you just get it hexed. So we're actually, I think, even though we are coming out of uni with 40 grand in debt or something, compared to a lot of other places, we're still doing pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You don't get hit with.
But it's still the pressure of it's like, I've just dedicated a year of my life and $15,000 to this degree.
Yep.
Now I don't want to drop out, because I've committed. What are my parents going to think? What are my friends going to think? But if you end up going that way, and then 5 years later you're doing a job you don't like, and you could have switched a year ago, and the big difference is you're going to be 21 instead of 22, or you're going to be starting 20. You're going to be 20 years old instead of 19 years old, which no one cares about in uni.
Yeah,
like it's not a big deal.
Yeah, and look, it's a massive cliche, the whole thing about do what makes you happy, but on some level, like every cliche, it's got an element and a basis of truth in it, and I think certainly that was my experience. That's what I'm encouraging my kids to take on board and really consider in their decision making is what do you love doing, what makes you happy, what gives you what do you have a sense of purpose around. Because if you can tap into that, and it may not be one thing, it may be that, I started life as an actor and I had, obviously, a passion for that. But then my pathway kind of opened up different doorways, presented themselves to me, and I found other passions that were connected to fundamentally the training of that. But, I love what I do, and so it rarely feels like doing a job. And I think as a consequence of all of that, and this comes back to the question around what kind of sets people apart when I'm looking at younger people coming into the workforce, and I might be running a workshop, and we might have 30 people under the age of 25 in the room. I think I can very quickly and quite easily, based on the way that people engage with the subject, engage with each other, those social aspect of work. You get a pretty clear and strong sense of who's gonna do really well.
Right.
Yeah.
Because and this is super. I think it's what you're just saying is almost attitude. You can kind of see just the way people are presenting themselves, the energy they're giving off, and how interested they are. Because it's like they call them like the Buddhist billionaire I don't know if you heard of him, he created the formula for success.
Yeah.
And it's like attitude times effort times skill. If you've got a good attitude, if you put in lots of effort and you've got skill around what you're doing, then you should be successful.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that, I think, yeah.
I mean, obviously it's not like a literal formula, but it's like they're kind of the three main things.
Yeah.
And if you're going, like, and I guess for young people out there, if you're going for a job interview, these are almost the three things someone wants to see. They want to see your attitude, so how excited are you to work with this company or the job? How much effort are you going to put in? How much time and effort you're going to put in, and what's your skill level around whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things that I would challenge, though, is the idea that attitude is something you can necessarily, because you get this quite a bit, in different organisations where people talk about, attitude, and it almost becomes it can become a sense of obligation that I've got to somehow manifest a positive attitude. Sure,
and it could be like fake almost.
Yeah, well, I think then you get the risk is that you get a whole lot of people operating with a degree of inauthenticity.
Yes,
because the whatever it is, the hierarchy or leadership is saying we value a good attitude, and so I think attitude comes back to this sense of passion and purpose, like finding 100%. What it is that gives me a sense of drive, that what is it that I want to achieve that's, maybe for myself, but maybe that's for others or for the world, and then how do I pursue that sense of purpose, and how do I do that with passion? And then attitude takes care of itself. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to kind of think about it.
Because I'm thinking, I've never had to fake attitude whenever I've gone on a job interview or I've gone for something, because I was going for something I really wanted and I was super excited about it, so it just came out. And I think, and I'd like to think that people can kind of tell the difference between someone who's kind of faking the attitude because they know that's what they want to see, and someone who's just happened naturally. As you mentioned, they've got the passion, they've got the drive. It's something they really love. And so, yeah, it's a really good point to just kind of note, because it's becoming so popular, that people might be creating levels of inauthenticity. That's the word, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about the ease or the lack thereof with which people might move around within the sort of formal tertiary education structures. But I think one thing that is definitely true is that once you're in the workforce, then moving around from profession to profession or career to career is a whole lot easier, because I think that, and again, I would take, and maybe because it's a more familiar environment to me because I do so much work with the professional services firms, but you take someone like PwC or Deloitte,
yeah,
and to your point, they're not looking necessarily at your formal education unless what they're looking for is a very technical area
specific
of expertise. Yeah. But they're taking a much more holistic view of the person that they're recruiting, and do they fit in with what we're trying to do on a much bigger strategic level? Do they have the right kind of qualities, and do they have the right aptitude for a broader sense of what we're trying to achieve, rather than those narrower technical skills?
Yeah, did you get a HD and whatever mark or whatever?
Exactly. So it's, and then within an environment like that, you can move around in all sorts of different directions, which I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it depends on the person, but I personally wouldn't like to be pigeonholed into one area. So the fact that and it's good to know that, like, once you're in, it's once you're in, you can kind of shift around, because you can leverage. Oh, I worked here for a year, so I've got this experience. You can leverage people saying, "Oh, Byron's great. He did this." Get and just pivot, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Understanding that it's not your marks that are going to get you the job. There's other external factors, and if we can actually focus on those external factors. And would you say a lot of it is like culture? Like they want to see that you're going to fit into the team culture, and you're going to.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because there's a bit of a paradox in all of that, because to some degree, every organisation is looking to establish a culture that is going to help them fulfil what they're trying to pursue. Because so there's a bloke called Peter Drucker who's written one of the gurus on strategy, and his saying is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which means you can have a great strategic plan, you can have all of your everything lined up,
maps and everything.
Yeah, you can have all of your resources in place and your budgets worked out, but if you don't have not just the right people, but the right, because what culture is the aggregate of who's in your organisation, and what does that result in terms of the way people think and feel and act and norms and behaviours and all of those things. So unless you've got that right combination of people creating the right culture, your strategy might not be worth the paper it's written on. So yes, you want to have a clearly defined sense of, what culture are we trying to create in order that we can achieve the things we want to achieve, right? But the underside of that is that, that you kind of got to fit in or,
Yes.
go elsewhere.
I guess you could have all the qualifications, you can get the job done, but because you don't align with whatever the team's culture is, you might not get the job.
Well, maybe. But then that flies in the face of the concept of diversity and diversity of thinking and diversity of style and personality and culture and background. So whilst most organisations are looking for a clearly defined culture that will help them pursue what it is they're pursuing, ultimately profit, but by various means, you also intellectually, at least, most people will recognise that they want diversity. So we want people who think differently. We want people who are going to challenge the way we do things.
Yes.
Now, that as a concept is one thing. To live and breathe that is a whole other thing. Yeah. And I think a lot of organisations struggle with that. But I think what I see is, I think the younger generation coming through, whilst there is benefit in understanding the world of corporate and the norms and how things get done, I like the fact that, I love it when you get a young person who comes in and perhaps from a place of naivety, doesn't necessarily, maybe they just don't get all of that, and they kind of come in, it's a bit of a bull at the gate, but they're coming in with a different perspective. Now, I really love that. I really love seeing that. I love somebody who's got a different point of view, particularly when you can back that point of view up with some intelligent rationale and argument. But that doesn't always land well in certain cultures, regardless of what they might say outwardly. So
I guess especially if in the older generation, you've got a bit of an ego. So who's this young guy coming in, think he knows more than us and that sort of stuff. But you're right, like the world's changing so fast. And I did this ages ago. I did an episode and we were talking about generational flow. It was like how the generations actually need to be working together because each of them has strengths and weaknesses.
Totally.
Obviously Gen Z. No, Gen X. No, Gen Z. Yeah,
Gen Z. I think I'm Gen X.
Yeah. Gen Z's the current generation coming up. Like obviously they're going to be very technologically literate, and they've got fresh perspective on this sort of stuff. But I think we're quite under-disciplined and have a lack of focus and patience when it comes to a lot of things. And so it's just kind of flowing between trying to figure out that generational flow. And as you mentioned, if someone like you, if we come in with a fresh perspective, that can be really powerful. But then I guess it's like, for a young person, I'm trying to put myself in that position. If I came into a company, would I have the guts to go against what they're saying? Because I might, especially in a corporate environment, which can be probably quite cutthroat, would I have the guts to speak out and say, actually, what if we went to this direction instead?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and it comes up a lot. And most of the time, in most organisations that I work with, what that sort of leadership group, and that's probably everyone sort of from middle management up, most of the time they would outwardly encourage people to sort of challenge and speak up and get in. Now, we're all human beings, so whilst they might encourage that and intellectually they might be up for that, when the moment comes, it can create a bit of tension and conflict. And one of the things we try and help much more senior people do is learn how to embrace that, because at all stages of life and of your career, what I've come to believe with incredible passion is that the people who will be most successful and continue to be most successful are the people who have an ability and a willingness and a desire to keep learning.
Yes, 100%. I agree with that.
Because the world is turning so fast, things are changing so quickly. To think you've ever got it worked out is just, risky at best and naive at worst.
Yeah. And I've been in events with a lot of people, and I'll be in an event where a really big shot speaker's up, and then he'll come and, I've seen him sit back and I'd say, what's he doing? And he just watches the rest of the speakers. It's like he's getting paid to give his expertise, but he's still sitting at the back learning from the rest of the speakers. And I was like, okay, wow.
Yeah.
It's really good to see that. It's like most people that I admire and look up to are continually learning despite how big they are. And so I think, and as you mentioned, like if you stop learning for 5 years, you're now so far behind because the world's moving so fast with technology and especially now, if you stop learning now and suddenly COVID's hit and you weren't prepared to pivot into technology, online events and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and learning is absolutely. It's about how do I understand what's happening in the world from a technological point of view, from a political point of view, social point of view, all of those things. But it's also continuing to learn about yourself and understand, what are my patterns and habits and heuristics in terms, before using kind of the psychological framework of the way I think through things, because I even that requires an ongoing inquiry and curiosity about what's going on in here for me, and I think a lot of people who get to a certain point in their career and have been really successful. So you look at people who are, I don't know, senior leaders, probably on a good wicket.
Obviously, success is subjective, right?
Well,
but I guess people you admire or kind of like look up to be.
Yeah. And there's certainly sort of measurable, material measures of success and comfort and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So you see some people who have attained that and achieved that. And,
the lifestyle.
Yeah, and they're comfortable and content and hopefully happy, and anything that then kind of would come in and disrupt their worldview or who they are or the way they think about things is really uncomfortable. And so there's a typical pattern that wants to reject anything that says maybe you want to kind of look at the way you think about that and shift a perspective or broaden that perspective. And I think that's the challenge for the most senior of leaders is to stay curious and to stay open to ideas, open to even a construct of who they are, and that being challenged. Maybe you're not that person that you've been telling yourself you are for 50 years. Maybe there's a different side of you that you haven't discovered yet. And I think if that's what real growth is. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what defines, for me anyway, and my opinions are as subjective as anybody's. Of course, yes. But for me, that's what defines great leadership, is because there's a humility in that as well.
Absolutely.
Because I think there is a construct of leadership which is about strength and
front lines,
resilience and imperviousness and I'd take someone like Brené Brown and all of her work around vulnerability.
Yes.
And to me, it's because the flip side of, as she would say, the flip side of vulnerability is courage. And so to be open to new experiences, and this, I suppose, coming back to being universally relevant to whomever you are at whatever stage of life, being open to new experiences and absorbing everything you can out of that, even when it's uncomfortable, is the ability to do that, which is fundamentally
I'd say especially
learning.
when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If it's uncomfortable, you should probably do it.
Exactly.
And you'll notice that throughout life. Like you'll see something, I don't want to do that. I don't really want to meet this person or something. Or I don't want to speak on stage. You probably should speak on stage. It's probably going to be good for you. It's probably going to, seek discomfort. Is I think Yes Theory, a YouTube channel. That's like the whole YouTube channel is about seeking discomfort.
Yeah.
So it's like,
yeah.
No, it's a great point. Just being openly minded and I think if you can implement that from a young age, it can be super powerful once you reach 30, 40, 50 or whatever.
Well, that becomes its own habit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you start early with this kind of mindset of curiosity and desire to put yourself in those situations that are going to be slightly uncomfortable, don't take outlandish risks.
Yes, we're not saying.
But you know what I mean. Well, if you can make that your habit, is getting comfortable with discomfort. And that's a phrase we often use in our work. Is just feel it, get used to that feeling, and because I think over time, what you start to kind of reframe that experience as you feel the discomfort. And there's almost an enjoyment.
Yes, I was about to say, I've had that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I've done some speaking stuff and I was like, I was stressing. The second I got up on stage, I was excited. I was like, even though I was like stressing, I was excited. And yeah, I think it's really important. And I would be curious to know, I know so many people, if they're watching this is what they'll be saying. They'll be saying, that's great, but I'm introverted.
Yeah.
And introverted people, I don't want to, I really struggle to take new risks, to kind of meet people, to go out and do that sort of stuff. Would you say it's easier for extroverted people to seek discomfort than introverted? Or is it just
it's a really good point. No is my short answer. So I think what we're talking about, obviously, with regards to what creates discomfort, are often situations where you're putting yourself out there and there is some sort of vulnerability that is associated with being in the public eye. Now, introversion and extroversion, if we want to get really technical about what that means, is not so much about shyness or gregariousness. So an extrovert we associate very often with somebody who's out there. And,
loud, confident.
And that might be a consequence of extroversion, but in purest terms, extroversion and introversion is about where you gain your energy from.
Yeah, so extrovert gains energy by being surrounded by people, and introverts gain energy by being alone. Is it as simple as that?
In simple terms, that's the best way to understand.
And everyone does a bit of both, right?
Well, yeah, totally. Because we all we need different ways to re-energize ourselves. But put it this way: some of the most famous actors and comedians and people of public life,
you would think are extroverted.
Yeah, they're introverts,
right?
So and I often use this example when I'm if we're running a workshop. Is I've got an old friend and colleague who's, if you met her, you would say in a heartbeat that she's an extrovert, but she's not. She's an introvert. So she can do the public performance. But where do you find her after that public performance? It's not out in the crowd mingling with people. It's back in the green room, having a quiet cup of tea and just, refocusing. So I think that there's, the opportunity is there for anyone. I think some of those personality traits are obviously are going to play their part, because who we are at a fundamental level is always going to extrapolate into some of those patterns and behaviours. But this is the point about knowing yourself and coming back to that as a starting point and saying, well, yeah, I know that about myself, and I know that I've got a tendency to want to kind of back away from a situation. But as long as you have that knowledge and as long as you have that self-awareness, you're in a position to be able to make a choice with what you do about that. And I encourage people, anyone, whether you're an extrovert, introvert, whether you're whatever, is to say, well, okay, so that there are some things about me that have been encoded genetically or through my upbringing, and that's a big part, I think, of who we are, is our upbringing. So the nature nurture stuff. However it's come to be that this is the person I am right now, who else could I be? And that's just it. Ultimately, it comes down to the choices you make about the actions and behaviours you demonstrate. Regardless of what's going on inside, you've always got a choice with regards to what you do.
Yeah, and I feel like, and I hope my message would be, in regards to what you said, don't use the fact that you're introverted as an excuse to not be seeking discomfort, right? I feel like a lot of people will use it as a scapegoat. They'll be like, oh, he's extroverted, that's why he went out and made and built these connections, or he did this. I'm introverted, I just can't.
Yeah, and on the flip side, absolutely. And on the flip side, I would say that, because I think one of the most powerful things that anybody might learn, if I'm talking about, say, certain skills around communication or interaction, one of the most powerful skills that someone might learn is the skill of silence. Right?
Yes.
So on the flip side, to your point, which I agree with, I would also say to an extrovert, don't use the fact that you're an extrovert as an excuse for the ability to not be able to shut up and listen.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Because listening is...
We all know those type of people.
Yeah.
And it's not fun to be around because all they do is talk about themselves.
Yeah. And in this moment, I'm wondering, am I being one of those?
No, this is an interview, so...
But you know what I mean? Because I think if we go back to this idea about... learning as being the ability to learn and the desire to learn as being fundamental criteria for your success. Well, what is the subset of learning? It's curiosity, it's listening, it's tuning in to what others might have to say rather than
seeking.
Yeah, rather than being so preoccupied with what it is that you think you've got to say and that other people need to hear from you. I mean, sometimes I'm just like, oh, please, just stop. and listen to a different perspective, because it might not be the one you agree with, but there just might be something in it that could expand your worldview and therefore help you.
And that's what's so frustrating with, like, you know, Trump supporters and stuff in America. It's like no matter how much you say to them, they just don't listen. And it's like they can't open their mind up to another point of view. Obviously, there's heaps more examples we could go into, but that, because I've been doing that a lot lately, I feel like I'm always trying to see the other perspective. And I'll be like, you know, okay, we're a Trump supporter, but why are they Trump supporter? Maybe they were brought up with a family where everyone told them this, so it feels like they've been brainwashed into this. So if I had been brought up with that family, would I be any different? And so it's like trying to open up and just understand different. Now, obviously, I'm not justifying what they do, but yeah, it's just kind of opening up, listening to other perspectives, kind of instead of just going my way is the right way. Understanding, you know, what other people have to say, I think is really important. Yeah,
and I think if I was to identify one thing that most people struggle with, myself included, is that ability. Because as I've said a couple of times, I think having the intellectual construct in your head is one thing. Being able to do it is an entirely different thing. So even if you understand on some level the concept of non-binary thinking, by which I mean, you know, thinking beyond there's just a right and a wrong, right? So even if you get that and you go, oh yeah, no, there are always different perspectives and, you know, yada, yada, yada. When push comes to shove and you are expressing a belief that you're very passionate about, maybe a political belief, and somebody challenges that,
you're thinking you're being attacked.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it entrenches you even more deeply in your existing very binary position. So even though you've got the concept in your head, when you're in the heat of the moment, and partly that's a biological response where
you get attacked, you put your shields up.
That's exactly right.
And you just go down and you just go, no, it's like this. And you know, psychologically, if someone comes up you with high energy, kind of attacking you, you're probably going to put your shields up and go straight back with that energy. Versus if someone said, "Have you thought about thinking about it this way?"
Yeah.
And you might actually be, instead of putting your shields up, you might lower them and go, "Oh yeah, maybe."
There was a really fascinating article, and I took it off my Apple news stream, so I'm not sure of the source of it right now. I think it was the Atlantic or the Washington Post. But it was a story about an African-American guy who I think originally he was a reporter, and he got assigned to a job, and he had to talk to someone from the Ku Klux Klan.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, and it really he's dedicated his life to engaging with the KKK and listening. So. And
as a black man,
yeah, as a black man,
incredibly hard to do.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to read because with some very senior Klan leaders, and now, you know, of course, his community, he was saying that people are sort of like gobsmacked by the fact that he could even contemplate doing this, and equally surprised by the fact that any member of the KKK would bring him in and embrace him. But they did, because what they responded to on a very human level is the fact that he's a human being, and of course he's got his judgments of what
beliefs.
They're doing. Yeah. But he's demonstrating curiosity, and he just hangs in there and he goes, well, you know, why? Tell me why. Tell me more about that. Right. So okay. So how did you come to that belief that a person of colour is of lesser intelligence, whatever it is? And slowly, what his story was all about, how by listening, he sort of peels back these layers for the person who's doing the talking, of understanding who they are, and that a number of people, like I think he was quoted like over some X number of years, it was 40 to 60 Klan members have revoked their membership of the Klan, because there's this kind of spirit of reciprocity that happens that says, if you're really interested in what I've got to say, and maybe as a consequence of that and the way we start to relate to each other differently and build relationship, maybe I'll start listening to you.
Exactly.
And so that the process of trying to learn from each other results in a much richer understanding than the process of trying to teach, which is that kind of binary, you know, no, you've got to listen to me.
Yeah, had he just gone and said, no, don't do this, you're being racist, you're being blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they hear that every day.
Would have got nowhere very quickly.
And same with Trump supporters. They hear that every day. It's obviously not working. And so that's why it is a great story. And obviously that's probably one of the most extreme. For him to go and listen would have been incredibly difficult. So if you're kind of listening to this going, maybe I should listen to my mates or my teacher or something, it's probably a lot easier. And I think it's just like listening to this conversation, it's just becoming self-aware, right? And trying to catch yourself out when you are, I don't know if it's ego. I don't know if you think it's ego because you just think you've got a lot of value to give. Obviously, this is kind of why I bring on guests to the show, because I feel like, who am I to be putting out all this content for young people? That's why I bring on guests on the show, because I've got experience and stuff they can provide value for. Yeah. And so that's kind of my reasoning.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's all of those things. I'm not a psychologist. I'm somebody who's deeply fascinated by the dynamics of human interaction. And that starts with, who am I? Who do I think I am? So for me, I like the idea of identity. So how do I see myself? How do I think? How do I want to project myself into the world? How do I actually project myself into the world? And often there's a big difference between what I think I'm doing and what I'm actually doing, and how people are receiving that, and who are you, and what sort of messages are we sending to each other continuously through all of the nuance of our tone and our eye contact and our body language. It's a really fascinating dynamic that we create between us when we're in a social situation. So how do we understand what's going on, and my part that I'm playing and the part that you're playing, and by understanding that dynamic, mold it to such a point that we actually can achieve something rather than just arguing with each other. So, and if I come back to the work that we do around leadership, then I think people who have an ability to, I was going to say master, but I'm not sure if anyone ever masters
it. Of course,
right? But people who are better at it, of understanding that dynamic and what's going on between us, and just understanding and building an environment where dialogue can happen, where people are sharing their ideas, those ideas are being heard, considered, not dismissed, built upon, reshaped, and that's the process of dialogue. And people who can facilitate that, particularly in groups of people, because more and more what we know is becoming really crucial, always was, but what's becoming more crucial in a very changing landscape of business and life and politics and society, etc., is our ability to function as a team. So because there's so much that needs to get done, that needs so many different points of input, teamwork is more important than it ever was. And so I think it's the role of a leader to understand the dynamics of that team and foster an environment where it can work really well. Part of that is about encouraging people to listen to each other and be safe with each other.
Properly listening, right? Like, it's called active listening, right? And I feel like I'm quite aware of this as someone who does podcast interviews, right? And sometimes I'll catch myself doing it. I'll be, someone will say a point and I come up with a question and I'll keep talking for 1 or 2 minutes and I've kind of zoned out of what that last 1 or 2 minutes was because I want to ask this question. And it's like, I just didn't actually listen. I did technically, but I wasn't consuming it and bringing it in because I guess I wanted to talk about what I had to say or something. And so I'm always, I'm getting a lot better at it, I think. But when I first started out, I would kind of catch myself doing that. And so it's active, properly listening.
Yeah. And welcome to the human race on that one because we're all, and our attention spans aren't great. So we're always tuning in and tuning out. But again, I think it comes back to, do I even know that's happening? And I think
becoming self-aware.
Exactly. As even as a starting point, the fact that you're aware that you might be drifting in and out or thinking about what's the next great question rather than thinking of what's the content that I'm hearing and how do I let the next question emerge from what the person's saying. Yes,
because that's what I want. I want that organic, like when we're bouncing back and forth, having a proper conversation, not just me asking you a question, you answering it, next question. That's not a conversation. That's more of an interview. So that's more like just a one-sided interview. And so, that's something I'm always kind of working on. And in regards to leadership with the team, we kind of mentioned it earlier on in the podcast. You're talking about just having different personalities and traits in that team that kind of merge together. Because I know I'm really good at big picture conceptualizations, coming up with ideas. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are good at that, but when it comes to fine detail actually implementing, I'm really bad at. And so it's like
you and me both.
Yeah, and so that's why it's like, I want to bring in someone who's good at that, and I know people who are good at that, and like engineers and stuff who are deep in math, and like that's what they're good at. They're good at the nitty gritty, whereas I'm really bad. And so I guess it's creating an environment where you've got different people, men and women, different perspectives, different ages, to kind of create that perfect. Not that it exists, the perfect, but like that uniformed, workplace.
Yeah, and I by and large I agree with that, and I certainly know that I put a premium on people who can complement, who have strengths that complement my weaknesses. Let's say
yin and yang sort of
thing. Yeah, because you need that, and that in itself requires you to own up to the things that you're not so strong at. I think if you identify something you're not so strong at, again, that can be something that you might use it as an excuse to go, detail's not my thing, so I won't pay any attention to it because it's not my thing. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I think the things that are not your strength, because some people, if you're working with people, whether you want to call yourself a leader or whatever, a team member, people have needs from each other. And in one moment, if my need from you is to go into a bit more detail and be a bit more specific with what it is you're trying to explain or what you want me to do, you can't. I don't think you should really be using I'm not a detail guy, so I'm not going to give you that, because we've got to understand. And this comes back to your point about listening, I think, which is paying attention to what people need from each other, and because that's often what somebody's really saying to you when they're trying to explain something or express, or give you feedback or share a point of view. Sometimes the subtext of that, I think, is I'm telling you something I need from you. It might be some sort of validation or reassurance or clarity or sense of relationship or connection, whatever it is. We're social creatures, and we're always appealing to each other for something. So the ability to listen to what is that need that you're expressing to me, and how do I respond to that? I think that's what I see really great. I'll just call it great human beings, great communicators.
Great
what they do is pick up on those things.
And does it link back? I guess I think you're quite well aware of it. The Myers-Briggs test, which is, for people listening, it's basically just a test, and it's very advanced. We answer 40, 50. A huge amount of questions. You don't put too much thought on it. You just kind of answer which ones come to your.
Yep.
It's like a 4 multiple choice and stuff, and then it gives you a personality trait or personality type, and it tells you you're more likely to be good at this. You're more likely to be bad at this. Blah blah blah. And I think a lot of teams, I've done it before, will do an exercise where they do like a Myers-Briggs test, and you could do it online. It's free, isn't it? You search Myers-Briggs test. Have you done a lot of work in that sort of space with personalities and I guess?
Yeah. So it's so the MBTI is something that I'm an accredited practitioner of the MBTI,
right, okay.
And which is something accreditation I picked up many years ago, and have been through periods where I haven't touched it, and other periods where I've used it quite a lot, and it's a theoretical model that was developed a long time ago. It's got as very strong detractors. I think with any bit of theory or model or framework, it's got things that are helpful and it's got limitations.
Well, yeah, it can't be perfect. It was good though. When I did it with a team, it was scarily accurate.
Yeah.
We were all going around, we read you get a paragraph. I think we did Tony Robbins one or something. We got a paragraph about what this person is like, and we were like, that's exactly like you.
Yeah.
It was scarily accurate.
Yeah. So often when people do it and they read the description of their type, it's like, oh my God, it's like somebody's been following me around.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's useful. I think the most useful part of these things is it becomes just it gives us some language, gives us a bit of a lens to look through for understanding ourselves, and that at a certain stage of life that might be helpful. But it's, to your point about using it in a team environment, what these things are really useful for is understanding, well, who are you? Mm-hmm. And how do I take a view of you that is more appreciative? Because whilst you might have a great eye for detail, and that's not really my bag. So we can look at that on some level and say, well, those skill sets really complement each other. They can also create a lot of tension, because the person that's highly focused on detail can just feel like a bit of a pain in the ass to somebody who's not, right?
Yes.
Oh, God, you're so pedantic. You're always dragging us down. You're always kind of stopping progress because you want to ask the 50 million questions about all of these little, points of detail that don't matter. So difference can create lots of tension and conflict. And we tend to judge difference really quickly. So, somebody who is detail oriented to the person who is big picture, in Myers-Briggs term, it might be a intuitive type versus a sensing type, which is just the language of the MBTI. But let's say big picture detail. The big picture person might be looking at the detail oriented person, saying, "Well, you're just pedantic, or you're a pain in the bum,
None
or
of this
whatever
matters.
it is." Yeah,
That sort of. Oh, and I can completely agree with that.
So we bring a judgment to that. On the flip side, the detail person is looking at the big picture person, thinking, "Well, you're just an airhead. With head in the clouds.
This is going to make us look stupid because we've made these little mistakes and stuff." Yeah.
So it's. I think the MBTI, whatever framework you're using around understanding personality, is useful as a way of going, okay, well, maybe they're not a pain in the bum. Maybe they're just detail oriented. So it gives you the opportunity to bring language to our interaction.
Yes.
That's a bit more appreciative.
Some stuff that you can't really identify about yourself, and a lot of people won't. We mentioned before owning up to your weaknesses. I think what's also important is owning up to your strengths. So a lot of people will want to come across as humble and stuff, but there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm good at this, I'm bad at this.
Yeah.
Because hopefully you're good at something.
Yeah.
And to come across with confidence saying, I'm good at big picture, I feel like I am good at big picture conceptualization, coming up with ideas. I'm not good at spelling and all the little details and everything that goes into actually making it, perfect and professional. And so it's like once you can, I think it's very important that we own up to that sort of stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, because otherwise, well, there might be something you're denying to other people in not sharing what it is that you are good at, because that's your contribution to a group, right?
But the test allows all of that to kind of be on paper. And then we can, because like we read it, you can read it out, and then everyone in your team can be like, oh, okay, so that's who you are. That's your personality type. This is what you're after. Now, instead of feeling attacked because you're always asking for details, I know that's just your personality type, and I'm not taking it personally. That's kind of what you're getting to?
Yeah, exactly. So you're doing what you're doing not to have a negative impact on me. You're doing what you're doing because that's kind of the way you're wired.
That's why you're hired as well.
Yeah. And there's actually looking to the value of what somebody does. And that's what I mean by moving from judgment to appreciation, which is what I think those sorts of frameworks allow us to do, is to think, well, okay, that behavior or that pattern or habit that, kind of is a bit of a trigger for me that I tend to judge negatively, actually has its strengths and actually has its value, and so therefore I become more appreciative of it.
Yeah, that's really good. So we're just saying, instead of going, oh, it's so annoying that he's always coming back to me with all these reviews and stuff, you're going, actually, I appreciate that he's a detail guy because I'm not detail orientated.
Yeah.
Therefore, we're actually going to get a much better product because we're working together, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then even better if we can get a kind of a reciprocal understanding of who each other is, and then we can kind of work in sync much better.
Yeah, awesome. No, I think it
sounds so simple, but
it's a lot more complicated. But this has been a really good chat. But before we kind of wrap it all up, I like to ask all of my guests this question, and it can be completely unrelated to what we've spoken about today. But what would your number one piece of advice be for the younger generation, kind of coming out of high school, coming into the workforce, entering uni, that sort of age group?
Yeah, and this is one I've thought about quite a bit because
great.
I've got a daughter who's going through the HSC right now, and this is probably been advice. Yeah, I think the one piece of advice I would offer is patience. That there is plenty of time, that your mark, your ATAR doesn't define you. People will forget about it pretty quickly. You'll probably forget about it pretty quickly.
Within a few weeks, honestly.
Yeah. And there are so many opportunities out there, and wherever we come from within Australia, certainly there are some of us who are far more privileged than others. But by and large, if you've come through the secondary education system of Australia, you're in a pretty good position relative.
You're ahead of the majority of the world. Yeah.
So take the opportunities, appreciate the opportunities that affords you. Be patient and back yourself. Experiment. I think that's the other thing.
You went from arts to, corporate leadership, running workshops, running your own business.
No, I was an idiot who didn't know what
acting,
he wanted to do.
But I mean, I guess you're just following your passion, and your passion changes. You're just following what excites you at the time, and acting. And I'm sure your acting and has helped with presentation skills or running workshops. Sure.
Undoubtedly. I mean, for me, and I had this realization when I was at NIDA. I was like, I'm more interested in what I'm learning about the coming back to this point about the dynamics between people, because what the art of acting is being able to affect other people and understand how they're affecting you. And I thought, wow, there are lessons in this that are way beyond acting. This is life, because this is happening all over the place. And how do I apply what I'm learning here in a much broader way? And that was a thought I had when I was at NIDA.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, if someone offered me a $20 million film and I'd take it, but aside from that, I think it's coming back to this point of, yes, pursue your passion, but pursue the different ways in which that passion might be satisfied or realized, because there's lots of different ways of fulfilling yourself, and the more you experiment, the better, because you'll and 100%. Ultimately, I think it can become a combination of lots of different things.
Patience, experiment, all good advice. So thank you so much for coming on the show. But for anyone interested, if they want to get in touch with you, find out more, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, you can. My website is duncanyoung.com.au. We've got we run programs. They're actually launching a new project that we're calling Talk Club. So, there's only one rule of Talk Club. I fight about Talk Club. So we're doing a series of virtual programs, and what we're really trying to do, so this is me and my colleague Tennille Halliday, where we're really passionate about trying to re-establish the art of dialogue, which
I think we can tell from the conversation we've
had. So creating online forums where people can talk about things that are really important, with a kind of a learning mindset. So not a forum where people get to just beat each other up with their opinions, but actually to share and learn from one another, even when we come from very different perspectives on things. So that's something that's coming up pretty soon.
And that's just duncanyoung.com.au is the best place to find all your social handles. Everything's on there.
Yeah. I'm on. I'm not I should be better at the social
side
of things.
That's all right. We'll just go duncanyoung.com.au and I'll put the link in the description. But otherwise, Duncan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, mate. It's been great.
All right. If you are still here, thank you so much for listening to this entire episode. If you got some value out of it, it would mean the world to me if you left a review on iTunes or shared it with your friends or family. Otherwise, I'll be putting up videos of this episode on Instagram and Facebook. So check it out there at Byron Dempsey or at Driven Young Podcast. And I'll see you on the next one.